Millionaire CEO hired a single mom for a simple task. One quiet decision changed everything. He had less than 2 minutes before the doors closed for good, and Caleb Monroe knew that if he stepped forward now, everything would stay exactly the same. His schedule was tight. His phone kept vibrating. His life was already mapped out hour by hour. This wasn't the moment for delays. It never was. But standing just a few steps away was a woman holding her phone like it might break in her hands. She wasn't crying. That was what made it worse. She just looked lost, like someone trying not to fall apart in public. Caleb had learned to ignore moments like that. Years in leadership taught him how to walk past uncertainty without slowing down. People handled their own problems. Systems existed for a reason. That belief had taken him far. If you believe in compassion and the quiet strength of ordinary people, take a moment to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us how one small act can change everything. The woman's name was Megan Carter, though he didn't know that yet. All he saw was a single mom trying to breathe in a place that felt too big for her. Her shoulders were tight, her jaw clenched. She checked the screen again, then whispered something he couldn't hear. It sounded like a decision she didn't want to make. Someone brushed past Caleb, clearly annoyed. The world kept moving, just as it always did. No alarms, no emergencies, no obvious reason to stop. Just a quiet moment asking for attention, the kind most people miss. Megan finally looked up, not at him, but past him, like she'd already accepted she was on her own. Caleb felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not fear, responsibility. He told himself it wasn't his place. He had commitments, deadlines, people waiting. Stopping now would cost time, control, certainty. The logical choice was obvious. It always was. But then he noticed her hand shaking. Not from weakness, but from holding too much together for too long. She wasn't asking for help because she didn't think she was allowed to. And that realization landed harder than any crisis ever had. It made the silence unbearable. The doors chimed again. Final warning. Caleb took a breath, knowing that whatever he chose next wouldn't make headlines. It wouldn't be praised, but it would quietly change 2 lives in ways neither of them could imagine yet. Caleb Monroe wasn't the kind of man who stopped in hallways. His days were built around motion, decisions, momentum. Every minute had a purpose, every meeting had a goal, and every interruption felt like a small failure of discipline. He had spent years training himself to believe that control was the same thing as responsibility, and that belief had carried him to the top. Megan Carter lived in a very different rhythm. Her mornings started before sunrise, packing lunches, checking homework, making sure her son's backpack was zipped the right way so nothing would fall out. Her life was built around small details, the kind that didn't show up on calendars but still decided whether a day would fall apart or hold together. They had arrived at the same building for completely different reasons. Caleb was there to close a deal that would move millions of dollars across accounts without anyone ever touching physical cash. Megan was there because a temporary administrative task was the only flexible work she could take without losing time with her child. Neither of them knew how close their paths were about to cross. Inside the building, everything felt designed to intimidate people like Megan. The polished floors reflected faces that never looked down. The air smelled expensive, clean, almost sterile. She kept reminding herself that she belonged there, at least for today, because she had been invited, because she was capable, because she had done this kind of work before. Caleb, on the other hand, barely noticed the environment anymore. To him, offices like this were neutral territory, places where emotion didn't belong. He believed good systems removed the need for personal involvement. If something went wrong, it was because someone didn't follow the process. That belief made the world feel predictable and safe. Megan clutched her phone, not because she was lost, but because she was grounding herself. On the screen was a photo of her son smiling with a missing front tooth, taken that morning before school. She looked at it whenever she felt small, reminding herself why she kept walking into places that weren't built for her comfort. When Caleb finally noticed her again, it wasn't out of kindness. It was irritation. She was standing where she shouldn't be, hesitating in a space meant for movement. In his world, hesitation cost money. Still, something about the way she stood there, trying to decide without asking anyone for help, slowed him down. Megan wasn't waiting for someone to save her. That was important. She was waiting because she didn't want to make the wrong choice and cause trouble she couldn't fix. Years of carrying responsibility alone had taught her to be careful, to think 3 steps ahead, to avoid mistakes at all costs. Neither of them understood it yet, but the tension building between them had nothing to do with the building, the job, or the moment itself. It was the collision of 2 belief systems, one built on control and the other on care. And the choice Caleb was about to make would quietly expose which one was stronger. Megan was finally led into a quiet side room and given the task that everyone else had dismissed as routine. It was a short assignment, framed as something purely technical, the kind of thing people assumed could not possibly carry emotional weight. She was asked to review a set of documents tied to a transition that would affect people far removed from the building she stood in. The instructions were brief, almost careless. No one explained why the task mattered, only that it needed to be done quickly and without questions. Megan had learned long ago that when instructions were vague, responsibility often fell on the person who noticed the cracks. She sat down, opened the file, and began reading with the kind of attention that came from years of protecting what little she had. As she moved through the pages, something felt wrong in a way that was hard to describe. It wasn't an obvious error, not a missing signature or a broken calculation. It was a detail hidden in the language itself, a quiet shift in responsibility that would leave certain people exposed if anything went wrong. The kind of thing that looked harmless until real lives were involved. Megan stopped reading and leaned back, her heart beating a little faster. She knew what that line meant because she had lived the consequences of decisions made by people who never met her. She understood how systems could technically work while still failing the humans trapped inside them. That knowledge didn't come from school or training, but from experience. She checked the instructions again, hoping she had misunderstood. The task was clear. Review, confirm, submit. No mention of corrections, no invitation to flag concerns. She realized that if she followed the rules exactly as written, she would be protected, but someone else would pay the price later. The thought sat heavy in her chest. Outside the room, Caleb was already moving on to his next obligation. To him, the task Megan was doing was invisible, already filed away as completed in his mind. He trusted the layers beneath him to handle details, believing that systems, not individuals, were the safest way to run a company of his size. Megan stared at the screen longer than she should have. She thought about her son, about the nights she had stayed awake trying to fix problems no one else wanted to see. She knew what it meant to be on the receiving end of quiet decisions made without care, and she felt the weight of knowing she might be the only one who noticed this one. In that moment, the story shifted, though neither of them could feel it yet. Megan was no longer just completing a task. She was standing at the edge of a choice that would quietly redirect multiple lives, and the question wasn't whether she could change anything, but whether she was willing to step beyond what was expected of her. Megan sat alone in the small room long after she should have finished the task, staring at the same sentence again and again, feeling the quiet pressure build inside her chest. There was no one to ask, no supervisor waiting nearby, no safety net that would catch her if she made the wrong call. The silence around her felt heavier than noise, like the world had stepped away and left her to decide without witnesses. She thought about how easy it would be to do exactly what was expected and walk away without consequences. No one would question her work, and no one would ever know she had seen the problem. She would get paid, return home, and continue the careful life she had built around avoiding unnecessary risks. That option was safe, logical, and completely defensible. But safety had never meant peace for Megan. She had lived long enough knowing that quiet compliance often pushed pain onto people who had no choice in the matter. She remembered moments when someone else's small decision had reshaped her life without warning, leaving her to clean up damage she never caused. Those memories didn't arrive as anger, but as exhaustion. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, not to call anyone, but to steady herself. The picture of her son smiled back at her from the screen, unaware of how close his mother was to a choice that scared her. She wondered what lesson she was teaching him without words, what kind of world she was silently agreeing to by staying quiet now. Across the building, Caleb remained unaware that anything was wrong. His day unfolded as planned, filled with conversations about growth, projections, and future stability. He trusted that every small piece of the machine was working because it always had before. That trust allowed him to move fast, but it also kept him distant from the human cost of speed. Megan leaned forward again, rereading the section with fresh eyes, confirming what she already knew was true. The error wasn't dramatic, but it was dangerous in its subtlety. It shifted accountability away from those with power and placed it on people who wouldn't even understand what had happened until it was too late. Fixing it would mean stepping outside her role. Fear settled in her stomach. Not fear of punishment, but fear of being alone in the decision. She had no guarantee anyone would support her if she spoke up, no promise that honesty would be welcomed. The system was not designed to reward interruption, especially from someone without status. That realization made the room feel smaller. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a slow breath, accepting that there was no perfect outcome waiting for her. Whatever she chose would follow her home, would sit with her in the quiet moments after dinner. When the house finally settled, the only question left was which version of herself she could live with. When Megan opened her eyes again, her cursor hovered over the document, ready to move, ready to change something that no one had asked her to touch. She didn't know what the consequences would be, only that doing nothing would cost someone else far more than it would ever cost her. And somewhere in that uncertainty, a line was about to be crossed. Megan didn't announce what she was doing, and she didn't ask permission from anyone who outranked her. She stayed seated, adjusted the document quietly, and worked through the language with care, making sure every change was accurate, justified, and defensible if it were ever questioned. There was no emotion in her hands as she typed, only focus shaped by years of solving problems alone. She made the correction in a way that didn't draw attention, embedding it naturally into the structure so it wouldn't look like an interruption or a challenge. Anyone reading it later would assume it had always been that way, that the responsibility had never been shifted unfairly in the first place. Megan understood systems well enough to know that the safest change was the one that felt invisible. As she reviewed her work one final time, a wave of doubt washed over her, not because she thought she was wrong, but because she knew she might never know if she was right. There would be no confirmation email, no thank you, no acknowledgement of effort. She was choosing uncertainty over comfort, and that came with a quiet cost. She submitted the document and closed her laptop, feeling both relief and unease settle at the same time. The task was complete, at least on paper, and she had done more than she was asked without anyone noticing. That knowledge didn't feel heroic or empowering. It felt heavy, like carrying a secret that wasn't hers to share. Megan left the room without anyone stopping her, blending back into the flow of people who belonged there more than she did. No alarms sounded, no one rushed after her, and nothing in the building suggested that a turning point had just passed. To everyone else, the day continued exactly as planned. Across the building, Caleb signed off on several decisions without hesitation, unaware that one of them had quietly been altered. He trusted the process enough not to double-check details that had already moved through multiple layers. That trust allowed him to stay focused on the future, but it also meant he missed the moment when the past could have repeated itself. Later that evening, Megan sat at her kitchen table, helping her son with homework while dinner warmed on the stove. She smiled at his excitement over something small, something that mattered only to him, and wondered if she had protected a future she would never see. The thought didn't bring pride, only a calm sense of rightness she rarely allowed herself to feel. As the night settled, Megan lay awake longer than usual, replaying the choice she had made and the risks she had taken alone. She didn't know if it would come back to her, or if it would disappear into the system forever. What she didn't realize yet was that the change she made was already beginning to ripple outward, quietly moving towards someone who would soon feel its impact. The first sign that something had changed came quietly, the way most meaningful shifts do. Caleb noticed that a problem he had expected to surface simply never appeared. Reports that usually arrived with red flags came back clean, and follow-up emails carried a calm tone that felt unfamiliar for a transition of that size. At first, he assumed it was luck or improved efficiency, and he moved on without questioning it. As days passed, the absence of trouble began to feel strange. Caleb had learned to trust patterns more than promises, and this pattern didn't fit what he knew. When systems worked too smoothly, it usually meant something important had been overlooked or silently absorbed by someone else. That realization pulled him back to the decision he had already mentally closed. He asked his team to walk him through the process again, step by step, not because he was angry, but because something in him felt unsettled. The room filled with confident explanations, charts, and timelines, all pointing to a flawless execution. Still, Caleb felt a growing sense that the answer wasn't in the presentation, but in the margins no one was showing him. While Caleb searched for clarity, Megan was moving through her own quiet struggle. She returned to her routine, balancing work, parenting, and the constant effort of staying emotionally steady. She didn't expect anything to come from the decision she had made, but the waiting carried its own weight. Doing the right thing didn't erase uncertainty. It simply changed its shape. One evening, Megan received an unexpected email requesting clarification on a technical adjustment she had made. The message wasn't accusatory, but it was direct enough to make her pause. She reread it several times, feeling old fears resurface, fears of being misunderstood or blamed for stepping beyond her role. Still, she responded honestly, explaining her reasoning without defensiveness. Caleb read her explanation late at night, long after his office had emptied. As he followed her logic, something clicked into place that his team had missed entirely. He saw how close they had come to causing harm without ever realizing it, and how easily the responsibility would have fallen on people with no power to push back. The realization left him quiet. For the first time in a long while, Caleb felt something other than control guiding his actions. He didn't look for someone to correct or criticize. Instead, he focused on understanding how one person, operating without authority, had protected others through attention and care. That understanding shifted his focus from outcomes to intentions. Megan, unaware of the full weight of his realization, waited in a state of calm tension. She had done what she believed was right, but she also knew that honesty didn't always lead to understanding. The silence stretched longer than she expected, and with it came questions she tried not to ask herself too loudly. What neither of them knew yet was that this moment marked the beginning of a different kind of fight. There was no enemy to defeat, no accusation to make, no victory to claim. What lay ahead was a struggle to rebuild trust, redefine responsibility, and decide how far kindness could reach once it was finally seen. Caleb asked Megan to meet him in person, not in a conference room filled with glass walls and observers, but in a quiet space where conversations didn't feel like performances. When she arrived, she didn't know what to expect, only that the request carried weight. She sat across from him with the same calm posture she always used when walking into unfamiliar territory, steady on the outside, alert on the inside. Caleb didn't begin with authority or explanation. Instead, he told her he wanted to understand the decision she had made, not from a technical standpoint, but from a human one. His voice was slower than usual, stripped of the urgency that normally defined him. That alone made Megan realize something important had shifted. She explained her reasoning without drama, describing how she noticed the detail and why it felt impossible to ignore once she understood its impact. She didn't frame herself as brave or selfless, only honest. She spoke about responsibility the way someone does when it has been carried for so long that it becomes second nature. As Megan spoke, Caleb listened in a way he rarely did, without interrupting or preparing a response. He began to see how much of his success had been built on trusting systems rather than people, and how dangerous that trust could be when empathy was removed. Her words didn't accuse him, but they held up a mirror he hadn't known he was avoiding. For Megan, the conversation was more emotional than she expected. She hadn't realized how alone she had felt making that decision until she was finally explaining it to someone who understood the stakes. There was relief in being heard, but also vulnerability in knowing that understanding could still change into judgment. Caleb admitted something he rarely said out loud. He told her that he had believed fairness could be automated, that good intentions could be replaced by good processes. Speaking those words felt like admitting a weakness, but also like releasing a weight he had carried without questioning. Megan didn't correct him. She simply listened. In that moment, something deeper than professional respect formed between them. It wasn't romance, and it wasn't gratitude. It was recognition. Two people acknowledging the same truth from opposite sides of power, realizing that responsibility didn't belong to titles, but to choices made when no one was watching. As the meeting ended, neither of them felt finished. There were no promises, no offers, no conclusions that wrapped the moment neatly. They both sensed that this connection, built on honesty and shared values, was only the beginning of something larger that would soon be tested by forces outside that quiet room. The days following that meeting were not calm, even though nothing dramatic happened on the surface. Caleb returned to his responsibilities carrying a new awareness that made familiar conversations feel incomplete. He began noticing how often people spoke around problems